Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with my Kislev unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3. I think it's worth discussing this ever since the Kislev rework. Here's what I'm going to consider. Combat ability, availability of recruitment, how easy they are to recruit, things like unit cost, tier requirements, and so on and so forth. Spoiler alert, Kislev has a really good army, so many of their units are pretty strong. But you do also have to consider army synergies as well and the kind of foes you're going to be dealing with. Because primarily with Kislev, you're going to be dealing with foes that have very powerful melee, with the exception of Chaos Dwarves, and to some extent Skaven. But when you're looking at Norska, when you're looking at Warriors of Chaos, when you're looking at Khorne, when you're looking even at the Greenskins, because yes, Grimgor is not necessarily too far away, and certainly Azag isn't, then there are certainly army compositions that work better in that kind of context versus others. Sure, you can go all the way to Nagrand, especially if you're playing Estancia, and deal with range-centric armies, but that is the exception, not the rule. So starting with the humble Kislevite warriors, I would say they're an S-tier unit by far. These are some of the best early game line holders that you can get. They're not the most heavily armored line holders, but they do have armor piercing damage. They do have an extreme level of leadership. In fact, Kislev leadership is so ridiculously broken that in quite a few tournaments, from what I've heard, in quite a few online multiplayer tournaments, they are flat out bad. And because between the inherent leadership benefits that Kislev has and the Buyer Blood ability, their ability to hold a line is ridiculous. And these guys are good against Cav, they're good against fast-moving units, they're good against large units, and they're pretty solid against infantry units. In fact, some people will argue that they're worth using throughout the course of your entire campaign. Whether or not that's the case for your campaign, I think it cannot be denied that these guys are really worth recruiting. Relatively cheap, very available, worth gang. Then we have Kossars, regular Kossars, the ones you can recruit from any settlement, like with Kislevite warriors. Not the best range units, but they are pretty decent at doing their range up. So Kislevite warriors hold the line. Kossars do a good amount of range damage. They do lack armor piercing, but against early game foes that may not necessarily have the best armor available, these guys absolutely are worth gang. Good unit, solid at their jobs, can even take a bit of a punch in melee, but obviously they're mainly a range unit. Get the job done, readily available in the campaign, cheap to recruit, especially since Kislev's economy has been significantly buffed, and Kislev does have a bunch of recruitment benefits. Then we have Kossars with long weapons. I would say these guys are a D tier unit. The reason I'm going to put them in D tier, I'm just going to shrink this image just a bit over here. The reason I would put these guys as a D tier unit is they do require barracks to recruit, but if you have a barracks at tier 2, you're going to be recruiting other things with that. Whereas if you have a barracks, if you only have tier 1 settlement, there's just better buildings to get. So there's not really that much reason to get these guys, especially since the addition of Kislevite warriors. Like if you want something to deal with anti-large, you will generally get Kislevite warriors. Like yes, if the option is there, you're looking to recruit ranged, you would get these Kossars with the anti-large weapon. But outside of that, they're kind of meaningless as a unit. I mean, don't get me wrong. Just in those that kind of context where you can recruit them and you're looking to buy range units and you don't have any other option and you have enough Kislevite warriors in your army, they're worth it. But outside of that, not necessarily so much. Then we have Akshina Ambushers. So Akshina Ambushers have a really strong amount of combat capability. They also have a decent amount of stealth capability, especially when you're thinking about the Stankias campaign. They are absolutely far more expensive than regular Kislevite Kossars, but they do significantly more damage. Just overall, a better unit to use in battles. They'll do more damage. They'll be relevant throughout the course of your campaign as a ranged crossbow unit. And while they don't have the same kind of armor piercing as gunpowder units, they also don't have the same kind of penalties either in terms of terrain issues. So Really good unit, worth recruiting for the most part. Like, these two can form the core of any army of Kislev throughout the course of your campaign. The reasons you would get other units has actually more to do with the auto-resolve, and maybe durability depends on what you're actually dealing with. Speaking about durability, we have the regular Kossars and Kossars with great weapons. Both of them are very solid units. I personally prefer getting a mix of both of them. Sure, you may not necessarily deal with a lot of range factions, but from my experience with armor Kossars with shields versus great weapons, I do find armor Kossars with shields just a bit more durable, and these guys are heavily armored regardless, good leadership, can get the job done. Worth recruiting both of them from my point of view during the course of a campaign. I think that massing either one of these is a bit of a mistake. Both of them have a decent amount of range capability with those pistols, which you can also upgrade. So fairly good units, cost effective, available at tier 2, absolutely worth getting during the course of a campaign. Then you have Streltsy, A tier unit as well. Pretty decent in melee, pretty decent armor. Not as armored as the armor Kossars, but out of range gunpowder units in the game, they're probably the most durable range gunpowder units. Unless you're thinking about some Skaven units like Jezzails and Rattling Gunners, but those have, obviously issues in melee combat. Like, Jezzails and Rattling Gunners will not win a melee fight. Streltsy might just be able to manage it, because beyond having pretty decent melee stats, they also have that inherent benefit of leadership that Kislev just does have with all of their units, or the vast majority of their units that they do have available during the course of a campaign. So absolutely, as a unit, worth getting Streltsy, and pretty easy to recruit, because in all Kislev campaigns you can get Prague pretty quickly, and Prague does give you the ability of recruiting these at tier 3 globally pretty quickly. So really substantial benefit over there with Prague. Otherwise, you just need a tier 3 settlement. Then we have Tsar Guard and Tsar Guard with great weapons. Now, Tsar Guard with shields are a really solid line holder, the ultimate line holder for Kislev. Good armor, good shields, great durability. Cost effectiveness, pretty decent. The one problem I do have with Tsar Guard is the fact that they do take multiple turns to recruit, and given the pacing of Kislev campaigns, you may not actually have the time to recruit a lot of these, but a couple of these Tsar Guard with shields can make a difference in those kind of pitch battles, and they're really good in auto-resolve as well. Just overall a very effective unit. Is worth eventually replacing your armored Kossars with these guys. Then you have Tsar Guard with great weapons. I'm just going to put them a tier lower. The reason with Tsar Guard with great weapons, like armored Kossars with great weapons, when you can recruit them, tier 2. So that's very early on in the campaign, right? And very easy to recruit. In one turn, you can recruit them locally. You can recruit them globally if you have Prague in one turn. That is very good unit. The problem with Tsar Guard is they, with great weapons, they just cost more to recruit. They take longer to recruit, so it is an inconvenience. And when you're looking at building an army with Kislev, by the time you're actually needing Tsar Guard, or you're looking to recruit Tsar Guard in an army, I just don't necessarily see that much of a point in going with great weapons as opposed to a regular version, because by that point you might have other units. Like, these guys will not win against Chosen, for instance, or other heavily armored melee units. You look at Chosen of Khorne, that are a tier 3 unit, that they're obviously not good enough for that situation. They're not good enough in terms of melee capability. In terms of pure durability, the Tsar Guard with shields just are a flat better unit in terms of durability. So from my perspective, I could get some of these Tsar Guard, but I just don't think they're as good as the regular Tsar Guard with shields, so that's why I'm going to put them a tier lower. Then we have Ice Guard. From my point of view, and I'm going to have to zoom out even more. Okay, that's fancy. But with regards to Ice Guard, so my perspective on Ice Guard, they're not a mainline unit that you want to recruit in an army. They are also a tier 4 unit as well. They're more of a support range unit, so you may want to have 2 or 4 potentially in an army to support with slow. There is an upgrade through the supporter system that does improve their armor piercing, but in terms of pure range capability, Akshinas are better in terms of pure armor piercing capability. Streltsy are better, though obviously they have that penalty of being a gunpowder unit. So Ice Guard don't have that penalty, but I think overall Akshinas are just flat out the better unit to have. That's not to say Ice Guard are useless, far from it. They're pretty decent line holders, but their durability is lacking compared to many other units of Kislev. They are useful to have in an army a limited extent to support other units doing their job. So they're mostly playing a support role from my point of view in as far as army compositions go. That's how I stand on the subject of Ice Guard. Is still worth recruiting, but just not necessarily to form the bulk of your army. Then we have, well, basically the Flesh Hounds of Kislev. That's what I'm going to call these guys. Like, completely useless unit. Not great fast movers, but Kislev has plenty of fast moving units that you can use. You might argue about the lower tier requirement, but not really a great unit from that perspective as well. Like, there's just better units across all tiers, like more durability, more cost effectiveness, more maneuverability. Like, if you're looking for fast moving Kislev units, there's so many good options. You can talk about snow leopards. If you're playing Estanke, you can talk about the bears or giant spiders that she has in her campaign. So I just really don't think that these quote-unquote flesh hounds, purified flesh hounds of Kislev, are worth it. Same with the dervishes. Like, there is no more useless unit in a Kislev campaign than the dervishes. Like, absolutely trash tier cavalry unit. Not like, you charge these guys into a unit and they'll probably take more damage than the unit they're charging, unless it's a very, very low tier unit. Like, even the quote-unquote purified flesh hounds of Kislev are just a flat-out better unit for that particular purpose. Never mind that, again, you have snow leopards, you have wing lancers. Virtually any fast-moving unit, any other fast-moving unit that Kislev has, outclass these guys. They're absolutely not worth getting, and the building they come from is also, generally speaking, not worth building in the first place. There's multiple reasons for that, but essentially that cav building has very little on offer because you have alternatives to what it's offering, even at the same tiers, with one exception, specifically horse archers. But I don't really think horse archers are that great. Like, one, maybe two units just for the sake of a bit of harassment, but they share a lot of the issues with the dervishes. They just have that kind of range skirmishing capability. But if you're looking for range skirmishing capability for Kislev, there's, again, better options. Like, literally, a Hagwitch is a better option at skirmishing than these guys, because Hagwitches, one, will do more damage, two, they're more durable, they're a single entity chariot unit, they can get in, they can get easier get out because of the mass situation. Yeah, it's like a hero is better. Other units like chariots are better. Just flat out not worth really bothering with these guys. Then we have the wing lancers. Now, these are not a bad unit. Far from it. But I'm going to put them in D tier for the simple reason that at the same tier that you can recruit them, you can get Griffin Legion from Prague. And what's the point in getting wing lancers when there's a better unit that basically is the exact same unit, just better at the same tier? And while you do need to get the unique building from Prague to get it, that building also offers you other benefits, whereas with wing lancers, you have to build an entire cavalry chain, get it tier 3, which is inconvenient you in other ways in the settlement that you're doing it. So very, very questionable decision to go out of your way, and you have to go out of your way to recruit these guys in the first place. And there's, again, better units. Like, there's better cavalry units, even at the same tier. Even if you ignore Prague, you could consider, light war sleds as a better unit than these guys. Then we have Griffin Legion. Griffin Legion is a very solid cavalry unit. If not for the fact that there are also better cav units available for Kislev, I would probably put them even at this here. Like, they're an exceptionally good cavalry unit. They have Glorious Charge. They're just flat good shock cavalry in the game. They outclass many other cavalry that, like, compared to, say, J-Lancers or Imperial Knights, or other cavalry that is available. Remember, this is a tier 3 unit. That's how I consider it. It might only be available from tier 4 in regular settlements, but you got Prague. You can't ignore. Like, Kislev is determined by Kislev the territory, the landmarks of Kislev, ergo Prague, landmarks over there. So if you want a really solid cavalry unit, these guys can get it done. Pretty easy enough to acquire, more, and you won't necessarily inconvenience yourself in the same way as other units. But it's just the fact that, again, Kislev has other options that are worth recruiting in some other ways as well. Then we have Warbear Riders. Honestly, I'm going to put Warbear Riders as an S tier unit. So there's a couple of reasons behind this. It might be a bit inconvenient to recruit these guys in the first place, sure. But having a monstrous cavalry unit with few entities is actually a really solid benefit. They may not have the shock capability of Griffin Legion, fair enough. But their sheer amount of combat, durability, and capability is ridiculously good. Also, they're an amazing unit in auto-resolve. Like, this is something that cannot be overstated. There's so many units that in battle capability, they're great. But when you actually look at their situation in auto-resolve, you find them that they're kind of lacking. That is not the case with Warbear Riders. Great unit to use in battle, great unit to use in auto-resolve. They actually benefit from regeneration in combat from a Patriarch if you can get that healing, because again, like fewer entities, you have a better situation over there with that kind of replenishment of combat, healing combat. Then we have Light War Sleds. I think Light War Sleds, it's an interesting question. I think they're a B tier unit. They're not horrible. They get the job done. Pretty solid skirmishers. Pretty solid in melee as well. But the reason I'm going to put them in B tier, there is a better unit. Sure, it is a tier higher, but it is an excellent unit. Like the heavy war sleds. So the heavy war sleds of Kislev are not just a great cav unit. They are good in melee. They're durable in melee. They're good in sieges, because you can literally throw these things through a gate, and there's so few entities in these that they will actually handle the pathfinding and sieges, which is actually a fairly important factor. And they have the durability to boot. They might be a bit inconvenient to recruit, but as far as chariot units goes, cavalry unit, fast-moving units, they're excellent. Their speed may not be as good as the light war sleds, but here's the thing, Kislev has ways of slowing down enemy cavalry or harassing enemy cavalry and all that. And while some cavalry will catch up to these guys, well, actually, the way I would say about cavalry that can catch up to these guys, the kind of cavalry that can catch up to these guys is the kind of cavalry that's going to flat out lose in melee to these guys. The cavalry that would win in melee against these guys can't catch them. So these are an amazing unit to use in virtually every if possible. You might have to go out of your way to get them. So realistically, in a campaign, you might recruit more light war sleds than heavy war sleds. But heavy war sleds are just like superb unit. I'm actually tempted to put them in S tier. Little Groms, I'm going to put these in D tier. They're not a bad artillery unit. And look, if you can get the upgrade that gives them better AoE, sure, that can be great. But consider this. You literally, in every case of the campaign, you have the Empire, you have the Dwarves, you have good relations with them, you have benefits to allied recruitment through the Ice Court, through the supporter system in the campaign. And Little Groms are a tier 4 unit. You can get artillery from your allies, and it's literally the only thing you need from your allies, because other units, like you have cav, you have infantry, you have range units, there's almost nothing you need from your allies except maybe, stealing a hero or a legendary hero. But the thing that you would be recruiting from your allies would be artillery. So it kind of ends up being meaningless having an artillery unit that's a tier 4 unit. If it was a tier 3 unit, I'd probably put it in A tier, especially with the upgrade. But given the tier requirement and the fact that there's other units that fill the same purpose and are far more easily available in a campaign and are not so inconvenient, such an inconvenience to recruit. Like, literally, the only reason you get the structure this unit comes from is because you get the war sleds from that structure. Snow Leopard, I'm going to put it in D tier. Not a horrible unit, gets the job done. Fast-moving, flanker that can do a good amount of damage on single entities. But there is a much better choice on this subject, and that would be the Frostworm. Surprisingly very good, actually. Like, I was dismissive of this unit for a very, very long time, which has a change. But the more I played with them, especially a very recent campaign as Poor Resources, the more I realized, holy shit, these guys are awesome. Like, they have a great deal of damage capability in the same way the Snow Leopards have. They're single entities, so they can move around through units and on the battlefield. They're decently fast, decently durable. These guys, you can throw them at any problem, and they'll keep that problem occupied. When you throw these guys at Arbol or Archeon and they keep them occupied, they might not win that battle, but they're good against demons, they're good against human soldiers, they're good against cavalry. They can deny a flank to an enemy, they can be moved to a trouble spot. They're very easy to recruit, very fast to recruit. They're a mount option. They're just a great unit overall. Relatively cheap, relatively low tier, all things considered. Incarnate Elemental of Beasts. I'm going to put this as B tier. It does have combat capability, but it's costly, it's inconvenient, and like, you know, I'd rather have a bunch of Frostworms than a bunch of Incarnate Elemental of Beasts. Like Frostworms and other units just give me more combat flexibility on the battlefield. Like Incarnate single entities that are slow have a lot of inherent weaknesses. They can be powerful at times, and I would never say no to getting one of these, but it would also not really be a high priority for you to recruit in the first place. Then we have the Elemental Bear. I would say like Elemental Bear probably, I would say C tier. Like all the units in D tier, you would only recruit if you have literally no other options. Like you would probably recruit an Elemental Bear just because, but it's again, tier requirement, cost, inconvenience, and the combat ability it provides is not worth the cost. Like Incarnate Elemental Beast is actually a better unit to recruit versus the Elemental Bear. Like from my point of view, like it's just more nimble. It handles the combat situations better. Like they're not as good. Like I want to make a comparison between an Elemental Bear and say a Rogue Idol, right? A slow, big, massive unit with high tier requirement, high cost. Rogue Idols are exceptionally durable and do a lot of damage. Elemental Bears don't have that kind of durability or that kind of damage, and they have the same problems of Rogue Idols in terms of tier requirements, unless you're playing Warzag, of course. You know, that's a greenskin situation. I've played a lot of Kislev campaigns in Warhammer 3, and I've never bothered recruiting a single Elemental Bear, like unless I was really unless I was really messing up in a campaign. Obviously, the regiments are announced situations different. Regiments around, you should always recruit for emergency situations or to give you a bit of extra combat power. But as a standalone unit, I just don't find these guys worth recruiting at all. Like every unit above it, and even the Ice Guard, like all of them are worth recruiting far more. This is one of the lowest priorities you have for a unit, but you might still want to recruit a couple of them during the course of a campaign, but just lowest priority out of them, just barely misses being in D tier as far as I see it. So that is my personal tier list for the Kislev units in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. I'm sure there will be disagreements, but I do find, in particular, I do find Kislev Warriors, Akshinas, Warbears, Frostworms really effective. I find the units in A tier, so Kossars, Armor Kossars, both variant Streltsy and Tsar Guard with shields, as well as heavy war sleds, very useful. With regards to Tsar Guard with the Grey Weapon, I do generally recruit, I'm not gonna lie, but I also know it's not the most effective unit. You know, there's better ways to spend my resources, and that's why I feel like Light War Sleds, Incarnate Elemental Beasts, and Griffin Legion. Ice Guard, I only recruit very late on in a campaign, and the things at D tier, I actively avoid recruiting in a campaign because I just don't really see a point. The only reason I recruit Little Groms is because I get the structure for other things. If not for those other units, the sleds that are also recruited from that structure, I would just flat out not bother with Little Groms at all. So the only reason Little Groms miss F tier is because, well, they did give them a unique upgrade, though it takes a long time to recruit. Like, if you want explosive artillery, there's the Empire right next to you who can give you fucking steam tanks, land ships, hellstorms, cannons, or there's the dwarves who can literally throw you gyrocopters, gyrobombers, and maybe freaking thunder barges by the time you can recruit Little Grom. So consider that aspect in a campaign. Like, would you rather have a gyrobomber in an army or a Little Grom? I know what I'd go for. And for siege capability, you have dwarven cannons, you have grudge throwers that you can go for. Or if you want a unit with a lot of explosive damage, organ guns fucking exist, or hellstorms exist. So yeah, just pointless unit. If Little Grom was a tier earlier and the explosive damage upgrade and the research tree was available earlier, I think they would be far more worthwhile, but not as things currently stand. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.